So here's the thing. I wanted to have a conversation more on a personal note. And I don't often do this. I usually reserve my platforms to keep it strictly in a singular and succinct lane, right? In terms of topics related to business, performance, achieving more clients, making better principled decisions in terms of how you grow a successful enterprise. But there's a subject that I've been thinking about quite a bit lately because of a number of conversations. There have been personal experiences I've had recently as an African American entrepreneur that happens to be a male. And I think it's also relevant for the purposes of discussion of heterosexual male, right? And if you're not, but I think this is something that heterosexual African American men deal with that needs to be addressed. And it's simply this, right? I've had a couple conversations with entrepreneurs about why African American men tend to be so unapologetically absolutist in our approach to building businesses, in our approach to managing our lives, in our approach to just conducting our affairs in general. And it's for a reason. The bottom line is, for African American men, almost everything we do, particularly if you're a high performing, is predicated upon levels of integrity. And when I say integrity, I'm not necessarily always just talking about from a moral standpoint, but I'm talking about from the standpoint of being consistent in your word, consistent in your performance, consistent in your behavior, so you become predictable, so people feel safe, right? Key word, safe, comfortable with you. It also spills into accountability and consequences, right? And this is the prism in which African American men typically look at our business dealings and our relationships, particularly when it comes to enterprises. Because the bottom line is, African American men who are entrepreneurs or high performers in corporate America, we don't have the luxury of failure, especially as it relates to execution and making good on our promises or making good on our talent. We don't have the luxury of failure. There's not a lot of margins, not a lot of wiggle room there, and the bottom line is the margin for error is so absolutely thin because there's no empathy present for us, right? There are not a plethora to support African American men when we fail. There's not a overabundance of resources for African American men when we come up short or we don't excel and when we don't achieve. The bottom line is, from an early age, at least I know in the generation I came up in, as a teenager, you learn real quick that there's really no empathy out there for you if you make wrong decisions, if you don't follow a successful path, if you are not collecting receipts, in other words, positive outcomes as it relates to the nature of how you get down. And we learn this once again at an early age. We deal in a world of negative stereotypes and assumptions about who we are. And in every business dealing, in every conversation, every interaction, if you're a high-performing African American man, you realize that, once again, because of these assumptions and stereotypes, you go into every situation looking to disprove them. And I'm talking about society at large, and even within the African American community among ourselves, men and women alike. And it's important to be aware of that, right? When you're dealing with African American men who are high performers in corporate or high performing individuals as entrepreneurs, it informs and it directs a lot of our behavior, conversations, the way we conduct ourselves in general. Because once again, that margin is so absolutely thin. And so for people who may be having difficulty understanding the thinking or how to engage or how to interact and why high-performing men move this way, hopefully this gives you a little bit of insight. Look, the bottom line is, we learn coming up that if we enter into a courtroom, we're 4 times as likely to lose as the next person. The associated with the behaviors of African American men who end up in a courtroom is going to be 4 times higher than the general population. It just is what it is. There's no argument, there's no discussion about this. We know we're targeted more. We know that people take aim at us more when we enter into situations that could be disfavorable, where we aren't in control of the consequences or the punishment that may be laid down. We are really aware that the world treats us a lot more harshly than otherwise. We know that, look, feelings, life circumstances, the things that other people take into account when deciding to make decisions don't really show up in our world. It doesn't equate to us. Because once again, for most African American men, high performing men, right? Whether you be an entrepreneur in corporate America, there's no gray area. Once again, there's no empathy, there's no understanding, there's no one to pat you on the back, there's no one to say it's okay. You either win or you die. And that's just the reality of the matter. Like I said, the margin for error is very, very slim. Right? We go in knowing that if we're running a 100-meter race, we have to be prepared to run 120 meters in order to achieve the exact same thing. Because no one's going to give us a break. There's no support, there's no empathy, there's no excuses. You know, if you look at shelters that are available for individuals who are homeless, dealing with abuse and dealing with issues related to substance abuse and dealing with issues related to suicide. You go to a website and you Google these things, and you're going to find that the uber majority of these resources that are available are not geared towards African American men. The bottom line is, you either succeed in life, you're on the street. People are going to see you. They're not going to look at you and say, how can I give you a hand up? They're going to say, you deserve to be there. Can you just hurry up and get it over with and die? I mean, that's the reality. And so, look, because of that lack of empathy, because we really don't have room for error and room for excuses, this is why you encounter some of the attitudes that you encounter when you're dealing with high-performing African American men, because it's just not there. You know, there's no chance to make, you know, people talk about the opportunity to make second impressions. We go in knowing that we better get the first impression right, because we're barely even given a chance to make a first impression because of the assumptions of what it is to be an African American heterosexual male in this society. You know, and that goes for society at large. That is also apparent in our dealings with African American women. Yeah, I said it. We deal with it with African American women, assuming the worst. And look, even men, we hold each other. African American men are actually harder on each other than anyone else, right? Because we're aware. So, you know, you have to show receipts. You have to execute. You can't not go back on your word. You cannot perform. If you say you're going to do A, B, C, and D, we know you better do X, Y, and Z as well. And so I wanted to share that today because, once again, you know, in my business dealings and conversations with individuals, oftentimes individuals say, well, why, you know, I've heard this a million times when having conversations with other people. So I have, of course, clients and colleagues that are not African American. I have conversations with clients and colleagues that are African American, women, and these same conversations with African American men. And oftentimes, not necessarily with the men, but with everyone else, it's like, man, why are you so serious? Why are African American men so serious? Why are you so harsh? Why are you so sharp sometimes, right, when it comes to conducting business and when it comes to engagement interactions? Well, that's a huge part of it. And, you know, it's just something that, like I said before, I normally reserve this platform for subject matter that is more technical, I think, that is more prone to focus on just execution alone as opposed to the conditions that color that execution. And it's an important conversation to have. It's an important understanding to come to, right? When we talk about, once again, matters of integrity, accountability, and consequences. So hopefully this is beneficial to someone who's listening to it. Hopefully, you know, for the African American men, the high performing men, who I know will automatically gravitate towards this, understand where I'm coming from, hopefully it serves as a bit of edification. No, you're not saying this is the reality, and it's okay. And let me also say this: this is not sympathy. Look, this is accepted. This is par for the course, and I'm okay with it. And I'll tell you, high-performing African American men are okay with it as well. So.